Hello and welcome to 2026. I did take a brief respite during the holidays, but I am back. I'm recharged. I got a lot of creative energy going on. I am really excited about 2026 and some of the new features that I've got going on at the Mad Sociologist blog and the Underground Classroom, not the least of which is kind of a nerdy mini course on the labor theory of value and contemporary American politics. I hope you participate in that and enjoy that. But in the meantime, I did want to say a little something about the illegal and immoral incursion into a sovereign nation to kidnap its leadership. So, Happy New Year? Same as the old year? This is going to be a long one. All right, look. MAGA is, of course, applauding this catastrophe because, of course, they are. Liberals, on the other hand, are appalled at this blatant violation of international law and liberal values. Of course they are. But one of the things that's probably not going to enter into the debate is the nature of this course of action in the historical context. Because when we take a look at this in the historical context, what we see is that the actions of the Orange Dawn are really not all that far outside of the actions of most presidents for the last 130 years or so. And we can go back. The United States has a long history of interfering in the politics of other nations, especially those nations in the Western Hemisphere. We can trace this back to the early 19th century with President James Monroe issuing the Monroe Doctrine, basically declaring that the Western Hemisphere was the United States sphere of influence, which was kind of a cocky thing to do, considering he had no power to enforce this. However, later American presidents, toward the end of the 19th century, did have the power to enforce the Monroe Doctrine and did use the Monroe Doctrine as a legal pretext for imperial actions in Mexico, Central America, South America, the Caribbean. One of the earliest examples of this history was Venezuela, where President Theodore Roosevelt literally took control of Venezuela's customs houses to resolve a debt dispute with Germany and Britain. So this goes all the way back. Now, this early 20th century period was referred to by historians as the Banana Wars. The United States was in a constant state of military incursion into Central America, South America, into this region, in order to what? To secure the interests of American corporations. Oh, wow. This is going to be a recurring theme, isn't it? Yes, it is. At the time, General Smedley Butler referred to these military actions as a racket and kind of referred to himself and his part in this racket as being the enforcement arm for American corporations. And he noticed that the things that were done in Central America, in South America, and even in the Philippines and Asia were done to strong arm these countries into imposing rules and imposing norms that benefited American business, not necessarily the people of those areas, certainly not necessarily the United States, but rather American businesses. And we can fast forward this. The United States has a long history. For a while, we occupied Nicaragua, Honduras, Haiti. We literally emptied out the treasury of the Haitian government, in essence, legalized bank robbery, right? We can fast forward this all the way through the Cold War and American interventions in Guatemala. All this stuff is really well reported. Just looking back at my lifetime, what have we seen? Well, we've seen what later become known as the Dirty Wars, in which the United States is fighting, in essence, paramilitary warfare in Central America to put down left-wing movements and to put down left-wing successes by funding and fueling and arming right-wing militias. And the results were absolutely appalling on the human scale. But again, why? To secure the interests of American businesses, right? And also to kind of wag the dog to a certain extent. I mean, if we go back, we can look at the invasion of Grenada, which was not even close to anything that could be threatening to the United States, but we invaded. It was an absolute catastrophe and clusterfuck, but we did it. It was successful. Later on, even the idea of kidnapping political leaders when George Herbert Walker Bush invaded Panama to basically kidnap Manuel Noriega. Not a good guy. Hard to feel bad for him, but he was the leader of that nation, and the United States went in and grabbed him and took him to the United States to stand trial. We can see this too with President Clinton when he kidnapped Jean-Bertrand Aristide from Haiti. So none of this stuff is unique, and it pretty much is standard operating procedure when we take a look at it. Now, what do we have? We've gone in, we've bombed areas in Venezuela, we blew up boats, we've killed hundreds of people, who knows, and now we land what amounts to not so much a military operation as an intelligence operation to arrest, some may say kidnap, the leader of Venezuela. Why? What's the express purpose? Part of it, I think, is a certain little wag the dog kind of feature. I don't really have the evidence, but it certainly feels that way. Let's do this thing over here because we do have the whole Epstein files thing. We do have the low opinion polls. We do have a midterm election coming up where we're probably going to get trounced, and we're probably going to have to find ways of manipulating it in order to not be completely trounced. So there is that distraction thing that has been playing in the media. But also, what? Well, the Orange Don is flat out telling us he wants the oil. And it's not that he wants the oil and that the United States is going to get this oil. No. Who's going to get the oil? Well, Exxon, Chevron, American oil corporations. They want to move in. They want to take that oil. They want to move. Now, of course, the Orange Don has said, well, they're going to make plenty of money. Who's they? It's not going to be the people of Venezuela because they already experienced what it was like when American corporations owned their oil fields and drilled those oil fields, or even and then exported the profits from that oil to the United States. Venezuela did not do well with that. That's why they actually chose Chavez in the early 21st century, right? Again, not a good guy. I'm not condoning his leadership. I'm not condoning the leadership of Maduro. Not a good guy. I'm not a fan of dictators to begin with, but I'm also not a fan of foreign countries invading other foreign countries to remove their leadership. And that's exactly what has happened here. But again, the debate that we're going to have is whether or not this was a good idea, whether or not this was a bad idea. We're not going to have the debate as to whether or not the United States has an intrinsic right to intervene in the politics of other sovereign nations. And that will just be assumed to be a valid choice. And so long as we're not debating the underlying historical context here, this remains the idea that the United States, an American president, can use his power, can use his military power, or his financial power, or his political power and diplomatic power to impose his will in a foreign country. That will always remain in the American toolbox and will be used by American presidents in the future. And one of the things that we know about power is power corrupts. Power will be abused. This is not the first time that this particular power has been abused. It certainly will not be the last time if we don't decide as a nation that this is an illegitimate use of American power.